Good evening, and welcome back to another quiet journey through the corridors of time. Tonight, we're going to explore something that might seem contradictory at first: the burden of beauty in an age when loveliness could be as dangerous as it was desirable. Before we settle into our story, if you enjoy what we do here, feel free to give this video a gentle like and subscribe to join our community of sleepy historians. And I'm always curious. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. There's something wonderfully comforting about knowing voices from around the world are gathering here in the quiet darkness, sharing these whispered tales from centuries past. Now, dim the lights. Find your most comfortable position and let your breathing slow. Tonight, we're stepping into a world where a fair face could mean the difference between a peaceful life and one shadowed by suspicion, where beauty was both coveted and feared, cherished and cursed. Imagine, if you will, a time when a woman's loveliness was measured not just by admiration, but by the very real danger it might bring. When pale skin achieved through questionable means, when elaborate rituals of enhancement, when the simple accident of pleasing features could draw the wrong kind of attention from the wrong kind of people. This was the medieval world, where beauty was never simple, never safe, and always complicated. Let us begin in the cobbled streets of Bruges, where the morning mist carries the scent of wool and commerce, and where one young woman faces a problem that would seem impossible to us today: the burden of being too beautiful for her own good. Verse 1. The merchant's daughter. The year is 1347, and the city of Bruges awakens, as it has for centuries, slowly, methodically, with the careful rhythm of a place built on trade and tradition. The cathedral bells ring out across the red-tiled rooftops, calling the faithful to morning prayers, all below. In the narrow streets that wend like ribbons between the tall, narrow houses, the city begins its daily dance of commerce and survival. In one such house, its timber frame dark with age and weather, its windows small and precious with their costly glass, lives a girl named Marguerite. She is 17, the daughter of a wool merchant who has done well enough for himself to afford a house with 3 stories and a servant to help with the heaviest work. Her father, Willem, trades in the finest English wool, the kind that will become the rich cloths that warm the bodies of nobles and wealthy merchants across Europe. But this morning, as every morning for the past 3 years, Marguerite faces a ritual that would puzzle us today. She stands before a small mirror, a luxury that her father's successes afford, and carefully, deliberately, she begins to make herself less than she is. You see, Marguerite has been cursed, though not in the way the village-wise women might speak of curses. She has been cursed with beauty, not the subtle, pleasant attractiveness that makes a girl marriageable and brings her family good alliances. No, Marguerite possesses the kind of beauty that stops conversations in the marketplace, that makes men forget their business and their wives, that draws stares and whispers, and the kind of attention that no respectable merchant's daughter should ever want. Her hair, when clean and combed, catches the light like spun gold. Her skin, despite the harsh soaps and the winter cold, remains smooth and pale as fresh cream. Her eyes, the deep blue of summer evening skies, seem to hold depths that make people stare longer than they should. And her form, developing as she moved from girlhood to womanhood, has begun to curve in ways that make her father nervous and her mother watchful. So each morning, Marguerite performs her ritual of diminishment. She takes the fine ash from the kitchen hearth, the gray-black soot that accumulates on the stones, and she mixes it with a little water to make a paste. Carefully, she smears this across her cheeks, darkening the cream of her complexion, giving herself the appearance of a girl who works harder than she does, who spends more time in the kitchen than in the parlor learning her letters. She pulls her golden hair back severely, covering it with a plain linen cap that hides its luster. She chooses her oldest dress, the one that's been mended several times, that hangs loose around her developing figure. She walks with her shoulders curved inward, her eyes down, trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable, less there. But even these precautions are not always enough. Just last week, as she walked to market with her mother to buy the fish for Friday's dinner, she noticed the way the baker's son followed them with his eyes, how his stare lingered, even when she kept her gaze firmly on the cobblestones. She saw how the young merchant from Ghent, visiting her father to discuss a wool shipment, found excuses to linger near the kitchen door when she was helping prepare the evening meal. And there have been other things. Whispers that follow her through the streets. Women who cross themselves when she passes, muttering prayers under their breath. Old wives who shake their heads and speak of girls who are too fair for their own good, who draw the wrong kind of attention from the wrong kind of sources. Beauty, in Marguerite's world, is not the simple blessing we might imagine it to be. It is dangerous. It is suspect. It raises questions that no respectable girl once asked about her or her family. The danger is not imaginary. In the towns and villages around Bruges, there are stories whispered tales of girls whose beauty led to accusations of witchcraft, of supernatural dealings. After all, how does a simple merchant's daughter come to possess such remarkable features? Surely there must be some explanation, some bargain made with forces that God-fearing people should not name. There are other dangers too. The unwanted attention of men who might take what they want without asking. The jealousy of other women who see in Marguerite's natural gifts a reproach to their own more modest appearances. The suspicion that beauty of such degree must come with a price, must be paid for in ways that compromise the soul. So Marguerite continues her daily ritual, trying to hide the gift that might destroy her. She applies her soot with careful precision, knowing that too little will leave her exposed, too much will make her look foolish. She practices walking with hunched shoulders, keeping her extraordinary eyes focused on the ground, speaking in soft, unremarkable tones that won't draw attention to the clear musical quality of her voice. Her mother, Anna, watches this daily transformation with a mixture of sadness and approval. She understands the necessity of it. She has seen what happens to girls who are too beautiful, too striking, too memorable. She has heard the stories, lived through the whispers, knows the careful balance that must be maintained between being attractive, enough to make a good marriage, and being so attractive that you become a target for forces beyond your control. Anna herself was considered quite pretty in her youth, pretty enough to catch the eye of Willem when he was still building his business, still working to establish himself in the wool trade. But her beauty was of the comfortable, manageable sort, the kind that made her a good wife and mother, but never made strangers stop and stare, never made other women cross themselves in her presence. Sometimes, in the quiet hours after the household is settled for the night, Anna wonders if she has failed her daughter somehow. If there was something she should have done differently, some way she could have protected Marguerite from this burden of extraordinary beauty. She thinks of the prayers she said when Marguerite was born, thanking God for blessing her with such a perfect child, never imagining that such perfection might become a curse. The house itself seems to reflect the family's cautious approach to their situation. It is comfortable but not ostentatious, successful but not showy. The main room, where Willem conducts his business and the family gathers for meals, is furnished with solid, well-made pieces, a long oak table, chairs with carved backs, chests for storing the household linens, and Willem's business documents. But there are no unnecessary decorations, no showiness that might draw unwanted attention to the family's prosperity. The walls are whitewashed and plain, decorated only with a wooden crucifix and a small painting of the Virgin Mary that Anna inherited from her mother. The windows are fitted with real glass, but the panes are small and set in lead, functional rather than decorative. The floors are covered with rushes that are changed regularly, keeping the rooms clean and sweet-smelling. In the kitchen, which occupies most of the ground floor, the great hearth dominates one wall. It is here that Anna and Marguerite do most of their work, here that the daily bread is baked, the meals prepared, the endless tasks of household management carried out. The kitchen is warm and welcoming, filled with the scents of herbs and baking bread, the sound of quiet conversation, and the ordinary business of daily life. But even in this safe, domestic space, Marguerite must be careful. When the delivery boys bring supplies from the market, when Willem's business associates come to the house, when neighbors drop by for a moment's conversation, she must remember to keep her eyes down, her remarkable features hidden beneath the careful application of ash and soot. The routine of her days is carefully structured to minimize exposure. She rises early, before the household is fully awake, and performs her morning ritual of concealment. She helps her mother with the breakfast, keeping to the kitchen and the family's private quarters. If she must venture out to market, to church, to visit relatives, she does so with her mother or a servant, never alone, never in a way that might draw attention. Even at church, where the family gathers with their neighbors every Sunday to hear Mass, Marguerite must be careful. She sits between her parents, her head covered with a plain cloth, her eyes focused on her prayer book. She speaks the responses in a voice barely above a whisper, never allowing the clear, sweet tones of her natural voice to carry beyond the immediate vicinity of her family's pew. But despite all these precautions, despite the daily ritual of diminishment, despite the careful structure of her life, Marguerite cannot entirely escape the burden of her beauty. There are moments when the morning light catches her face just so, when the soot has worn thin and her natural loveliness shines through. There are times when she forgets herself, when she laughs at something her father has said, and the sound draws looks from across the room. And there are the dreams. Dreams where she walks through the streets of Bruges, with her golden hair flowing free, where she wears the finest silk dress her father's money could buy, where she moves with the confidence of a girl who has nothing to hide. Dreams where her beauty is a gift rather than a curse, where admiration comes without danger, where loveliness is simply, purely a blessing. But she always wakes from these dreams to the reality of her situation, to the necessity of her daily disguise, to the careful balance she must maintain between being a normal girl and being something that might attract the wrong kind of attention from forces both human and otherwise. The burden of beauty in Marguerite's world is not merely social or personal. It is spiritual, moral, practical. It touches every aspect of her life, from the clothes she wears to the way she walks, from the tone of her voice to the direction of her gaze. It is a constant vigilance, a daily negotiation with forces that she cannot entirely understand or control. And so she continues her ritual, morning after morning, year after year, hiding the gift that might destroy her, protecting herself and her family from the dangers that come with being too beautiful in a world that is suspicious of beauty, fearful of its power, and quick to find supernatural explanations for natural gifts. In the quiet of her small room, in the soft light of early morning, Marguerite stands before her mirror and carefully, methodically, makes herself less than she is. It is a small tragedy, perhaps, but it is also a practical necessity. It is the price of safety in a world where beauty is never simple, never safe, and always, always dangerous. Verse 2. The tragic fate of Joan of Kent, as we leave the quiet streets of Bruges and the careful world of Marguerite. Our story shifts across the channel to England, where beauty played out its dangerous games on a much grander stage. Here, in the glittering but treacherous world of the royal court, we find the story of Joan of Kent, a woman whose extraordinary beauty became both her greatest asset and her most terrible burden. The year is 1328, and Joan is barely 8 years old when she first comes to court. Already, even as a child, there is something about her that draws attention. Her hair falls in waves of burnished gold, her skin has the translucent quality of fine porcelain, and her eyes hold a depth and warmth that seem almost otherworldly. She is the daughter of Edmund of Woodstock, Earl of Kent, and Margaret Wake, and her bloodline carries the weight of royal connection and the expectations that come with noble birth. But Joan's beauty is not merely physical. It is something more complex, more dangerous. She possesses what the court poets will later call a fatal charm, a quality that draws men to her like moths to a flame, often with equally destructive results. Even as a child, she seems to understand the power she holds, the way a smile or a glance can change the very atmosphere of a room. As she grows into adolescence, Joan's beauty becomes legendary. The court chroniclers struggle to find words adequate to describe her. They speak of her angelic countenance and her divine grace, but these pale descriptions fail to capture the reality of her presence. She is not merely pretty, she is luminous, captivating in a way that seems to transcend the ordinary bounds of human attractiveness. By the time she reaches her 15th year, Joan has become known throughout Europe as the most beautiful woman of her generation. Marriage proposals arrive from across the continent, from French nobles, German princes, Italian merchants wealthy enough to dream of royal connections. But Joan's beauty, rather than opening doors to happiness, begins to trap her in a web of political machinations and personal dangers that will define the rest of her life. The first tragedy comes in the form of Thomas Holland, a young knight who serves in the household of the Earl of Salisbury. Thomas is handsome, charming, and utterly unsuitable as a husband for a woman of Joan's station. But he is also completely, hopelessly in love with her. He courts her secretly, meeting her in quiet corners of the castle, writing her poems that compare her beauty to the morning star, to the first light of dawn, to all the lovely things that exist just beyond mortal reach. Joan, for her part, finds herself drawn to Thomas in ways that terrify her. She has been raised to understand that her beauty is a form of currency, something to be spent wisely in the marriage market to secure the best possible alliance for her family. But Thomas makes her forget about duty and politics and careful calculations. When she is with him, she feels like a girl rather than a political asset, a woman rather than a beautiful object to be admired and bargained over. Their secret courtship continues for months, conducted in whispered conversations during formal dances, in meaningful glances across crowded halls, in stolen moments when the court's attention is focused elsewhere. They speak of love, of a future together, of a life where Joan's beauty would be cherished rather than exploited. But such dreams are dangerous for people in their position, and the court has ways of discovering even the best-kept secrets. The discovery comes, as these things often do, through betrayal. A servant, jealous of the attention Joan receives, or perhaps hoping to curry favor with more powerful masters, reports the secret meetings to Joan's guardian. The revelation sends shockwaves through the court. A clandestine romance between a royal ward and a minor knight is not merely scandalous, it is potentially treasonous, a threat to the carefully maintained system of political alliances that keeps the kingdom stable. Thomas is immediately banished from court, sent on a diplomatic mission to the Low Countries that everyone understands is really exile. He departs without being allowed to speak to Joan, without any assurance that he will ever see her again. Joan, meanwhile, is confined to her chambers, guarded like a prisoner, while her guardians debate what to do with her. The solution, when it comes, is both predictable and heartbreaking. Joan is to be married immediately to William Montague, the young Earl of Salisbury. It is a good match from a political standpoint. William is wealthy, well-connected, and loyal to the crown. He is also kind, intelligent, and genuinely fond of Joan. Under different circumstances, she might have been happy with him. But Joan's heart belongs to Thomas Holland, and no amount of political necessity can change that fact. She goes to her wedding like a woman going to her execution, beautiful and graceful and utterly without joy. The ceremony is magnificent. The king himself attends, along with most of the court. Joan wears a dress of cloth of gold, her hair crowned with flowers, her beauty so radiant that several of the wedding guests later write that she seemed to glow with an inner light. Yet those who know her well can see the truth beneath the surface. Her smiles are carefully controlled, her responses to congratulations polite but distant. She moves through the celebration like a beautiful ghost, present in body but absent in spirit. The marriage is consummated, as marriages of this sort must be, but Joan's true self remains locked away, protected by the same careful control that has become her trademark. For 3 years, Joan plays the role of the perfect countess. She manages William's household with quiet efficiency, entertains his guests with grace and charm, and bears him no children of fact that causes whispers and speculation throughout the court. She is admired, respected, and completely miserable. Her beauty, rather than bringing her happiness, has become a kind of prison, trapping her in a life that looks perfect from the outside, but feels hollow at its core. Then, in 1341, Thomas Holland returns to England. He has spent his years of exile well, distinguishing himself in military service, accumulating wealth and honors, making himself into the kind of man who can no longer be dismissed as unsuitable. He is still handsome, still charming, and still completely in love with Joan. But he is also now dangerous in ways that the young knight who was banished 3 years earlier was not. Thomas does not come to court openly demanding Joan's attention. Instead, he works quietly, carefully, building a case that will shake the very foundations of her carefully constructed life. He produces documents, witnesses, evidence that he and Joan were secretly married before her wedding to William Montagu. According to church law, this would make her marriage to William invalid, would make her Thomas's true wife in the eyes of God. The case goes before the papal court, where such matters are decided. For 2 years, Joan's fate hangs in the balance, while lawyers argue over documents and witnesses, while the political implications of the case reverberate through the highest levels of English society. Joan herself maintains a careful silence, neither confirming nor denying Thomas's claims, playing her role as the dutiful wife, while her heart remains torn between duty and desire. The papal decision, when it finally comes, is a victory for Thomas and a disaster for Joan. The court rules that her marriage to William is indeed invalid, that she is and always has been Thomas Holland's true wife. She is free to be with the man she loves, but the cost of that freedom is enormous. The scandal rocks the English court. Joan's reputation, despite her technical innocence, is damaged by the implications of the case. How can a woman be secretly married without knowing it? How can she live for years with one man, while legally bound to another? The answers to these questions matter less than the fact that they are being asked, that Joan's name is now associated with scandal and irregularity. William Montagu, meanwhile, is devastated. He has genuinely loved Joan, has treated her with kindness and respect, and now finds himself publicly humiliated by the revelation that his marriage was never valid. He retreats from court life, becoming a recluse in his own castle, his political career effectively ended by the scandal. Joan, reunited with Thomas at last, discovers that getting what you want and being happy are not the same thing. The years of separation have changed them both. Thomas, hardened by his military service and embittered by his exile, is no longer the romantic young knight who once wrote her poetry. Joan, trained in the careful control required of a noblewoman, finds it difficult to recapture the spontaneous joy she once felt in his presence. Their marriage, when it is finally celebrated publicly, is a more subdued affair than Joan's first wedding. The same courtiers who once celebrated her beauty now whisper about her irregularity. The same poets who once compared her to angels now speak more cautiously, aware that her beauty has become associated with scandal and disruption. But perhaps the greatest tragedy is what happens to Joan herself. The legal battle and its aftermath have taken their toll on her extraordinary beauty. The stress of the proceedings, the years of uncertainty, the constant scrutiny of the court, all of these have left their mark. She is still beautiful, still striking, but there is a new wariness in her eyes, a careful guardedness that was not there before. Joan's beauty, which once seemed like a gift from heaven, has become a source of suffering for everyone it touches. Thomas, who fought so hard to possess her, finds that possession and happiness are not the same thing. William, who loved her genuinely, is destroyed by losing her. And Joan herself, the center of it all, discovers that being the most beautiful woman in England is not a blessing, but a burden that she will carry for the rest of her life. She will marry again after Thomas's death, becoming the wife of the Black Prince and eventually the mother of a king. But the scandal of her early marriages will follow her throughout her life, a reminder that beauty in the medieval world was never simple, never safe, and always, always dangerous. The chroniclers of her time will remember Joan as the Fair Maid of Kent, a title that seems to celebrate her beauty, but actually encapsulates the tragedy of her life. She was indeed fair, indeed beautiful beyond compare, but that beauty brought her not happiness, but a lifetime of complications, scandals, and sorrows that no amount of physical perfection could overcome. In the quiet hours of her later life, when the court has moved on to newer scandals and younger beauties, Joan sometimes wonders what her life might have been like if she had been born plain, unremarkable, free to make her own choices without the burden of extraordinary beauty. But such thoughts are useless now. She has played her role, paid the price of her gifts, and learned too late that in the dangerous game of medieval politics, beauty is not a blessing, but a weapon that can destroy its bearer as easily as its target. The story of Joan of Kent reminds us that beauty, in an age when women had so little power over their own lives, could become a prison more confining than any dungeon, a burden more crushing than any physical weight. Her extraordinary loveliness, rather than opening doors to happiness, trapped her in a web of political necessity and personal tragedy from which she could never entirely escape. And in the end, perhaps that is the real tragedy, not that she was beautiful, but that she lived in a world where beauty was too dangerous to be simply enjoyed, too powerful to be safely possessed, and too precious to be left in the hands of the woman who bore it. Verse 3. Medieval beauty rituals. From the grand tragedy of Joan of Kent, we turn now to something more intimate, more mysterious, the secret world of medieval beauty rituals. Here, in the private chambers of castles and the humble rooms of merchant houses, women engaged in practices that seem both familiar and utterly alien to our modern sensibilities. These were rituals born of desperation and hope, of vanity and necessity, of the eternal human desire to be beautiful in a world that could be both kind and cruel to those who possessed such gifts. The pursuit of beauty in the medieval world was not merely about vanity, it was about survival, about making the best possible marriage, about navigating a social world where appearance could determine destiny. And so women, from the highest nobility to the humblest merchants' daughters, developed elaborate rituals and remedies, many of which were as dangerous as they were effective. Let us begin with the face, for it was here that medieval beauty standards were most rigidly defined and most desperately pursued. The ideal medieval complexion was pale, not the healthy glow we might admire today, but a translucent, almost ethereal paleness that spoke of noble birth and indoor living. This was the complexion of someone who did not work in the fields, who did not spend long hours in the sun, who could afford to live a life of leisure and refinement. To achieve this coveted paleness, women employed methods that seem almost impossibly dangerous to our modern understanding. The most prized ingredient was ceruse, a cosmetic made from white lead that could indeed produce the desired snow-white complexion. Women would apply this mixture to their faces, necks, and hands, sometimes covering their entire bodies with a toxic substance in pursuit of that perfect, otherworldly pallor. The preparation of ceruse was itself a ritual, performed in the private chambers of the household, away from the eyes of men and servants. The white lead would be ground to a fine powder, mixed with vinegar to create a paste of just the right consistency. The mixture had to be smooth, without lumps or impurities, applied with delicate brushes made from the finest animal hair. The process was time-consuming, requiring patience and skill, and the results, when done properly, were indeed remarkable. But the price of such beauty was terrible. The lead slowly poisoned those who used it, causing hair loss, tooth decay, and eventually death. Women who relied heavily on cerus often developed a characteristic pallor that went beyond the fashionable. A grayish, unhealthy hue that spoke of the toxic burden their bodies carried. Yet still they continued to use it, for the social benefits of perfect skin outweighed the physical costs, at least in the short term. For those who could not afford cerus, or who were wise enough to fear its effects, there were other methods. Egg whites, beaten until they formed a smooth paste, could be applied to the face to create a temporary tightening effect that mimicked the appearance of youth. The process was delicate too much, and the face would crack and peel. Too little, and the effect would be negligible. Women would lie still for hours, their faces covered in this organic mask, waiting for the desired effect to set. Lemon juice, when available, was prized for its ability to lighten the skin and remove blemishes. Women would soak cloths in lemon juice and lay them across their faces, enduring the stinging sensation in pursuit of that perfect complexion. The acid would indeed lighten the skin, but it also left it raw and sensitive, requiring careful tending with oils and balms to prevent permanent damage. Perhaps most bizarrely, to our modern understanding, was the practice of bloodletting for beauty. Medieval medical theory held that good health and beauty were intimately connected, and that an excess of blood could lead to a ruddy, coarse complexion. Women would submit to regular bloodletting sessions, allowing leeches to drain what was considered excess blood from their bodies. The leeches would be carefully placed on the temples, behind the ears, or on the neck, areas where they could do their work without leaving visible marks. The process was not without its own strange comfort. The leeches would be kept in special containers, fed and cared for like tiny pets. The women would lie still and quiet while the creatures worked, sometimes for hours, in a state that was almost meditative. The theory was that by removing excess blood, the complexion would become clearer, paler, more refined. In reality, the blood loss often left women weak and anemic, but the temporary pallor achieved was considered worth the sacrifice. The care of hair presented its own challenges and opportunities. The ideal medieval woman had long, flowing hair of golden or light brown hue. For those not blessed with such natural gifts, there were remedies and rituals to achieve the desired effect. Hair would be washed with mixtures of lye and herbs, treatments that could indeed lighten the color, but also damage the hair itself, leaving it brittle and prone to breakage. To achieve the fashionable high forehead that was considered a mark of beauty and nobility, women would pluck their hairlines, sometimes removing inches of hair to create the desired effect. This was a painful process, performed with tweezers made from precious metals, often taking hours to complete. The pain was considered a small price to pay for the fashionable appearance of intelligence and refinement that a high forehead was believed to convey. The process of hair plucking was often a social ritual, performed in the company of other women, with conversation and music to distract from the discomfort. Mothers would pluck their daughters' hairlines, preparing them for court presentation or marriage negotiations. The ritual created bonds between women, shared experiences of beauty and pain that connected them across generations. For special occasions, elaborate hair preparations were undertaken. Hair would be washed with wine and herbs, conditioned with oils and beaten eggs, then arranged in complex styles that could take hours to complete. The hair might be braided with ribbons, adorned with flowers, or woven with threads of gold and silver. These preparations were not merely about appearance. They were about transformation, about becoming something more than ordinary, about achieving a kind of beauty that transcended the mundane world. The eyes, too, required special attention. The ideal medieval woman had large, expressive eyes that seemed to hold depths of emotion and intelligence. To achieve this effect, women would use various preparations to brighten the whites of their eyes and darken the lashes. Drops made from belladonna would be applied to dilate the pupils, creating the appearance of larger, more luminous eyes. The name belladonna, meaning beautiful woman, speaks to the popularity of this dangerous practice. The effects of belladonna were indeed striking. The dilated pupils created an appearance of passion and intensity that was considered highly attractive. But the herb was also highly toxic, and women who used it regularly often suffered from headaches, nausea, and vision problems. Some became permanently dependent on the substance, unable to function without their regular doses of the dangerous beauty aid. For the lips, women sought the perfect shade of red, a color that spoke of health and vitality without appearing too bold or immodest. The pigments used for lip coloring were derived from various sources: crushed insects, plant dyes, mineral preparations. The most prized red came from cochineal, tiny insects that produced a brilliant crimson dye. The preparation of lip color was an art form in itself, requiring careful grinding and mixing to achieve just the right shade and consistency. The application of lip color was a ritual performed in private, using small brushes or the fingertips to carefully paint the desired shape and shade. The lips might be made smaller or larger than their natural size, depending on the fashion of the moment. The color had to be subtle enough to appear natural, yet bold enough to enhance the beauty of the face. Perfumes and scented oils played a crucial role in medieval beauty rituals. In an age when regular bathing was not always possible, and when understanding of hygiene was limited, pleasant scents were essential for social success. Women would prepare their own perfumes, mixing oils and herbs according to recipes passed down through generations. Rose water, lavender oil, and musk were among the most prized ingredients, each carrying its own associations and meanings. The preparation of perfumes was often a collaborative effort, with women sharing recipes and techniques, trading rare ingredients and experimenting with new combinations. The process itself was meditative, requiring patience and attention to detail. The oils would be heated gently, the herbs added at precise moments, the mixture stirred with silver spoons to avoid contamination. The finished products were stored in precious containers, small bottles of blown glass or carved ivory that were treasures in themselves. The application of perfume was as important as its preparation. Women would dab the scented oils on their wrists, behind their ears, at the base of their throats, places where the warmth of the body would help release the fragrance. Some would perfume their hair, their clothing, even their prayer books, creating a personal signature scent that would linger long after they had left a room. But perhaps the most mysterious and dangerous of all medieval beauty practices was the use of cosmetics made from mercury. This liquid metal, known for its strange properties and brilliant shine, was incorporated into various beauty preparations, particularly those designed to remove blemishes and create that perfect, smooth complexion. Mercury-based cosmetics could indeed create remarkable effects, temporarily smoothing the skin and creating an almost otherworldly glow. The preparation of mercury cosmetics was a closely guarded secret, passed down through families or learned from traveling merchants who dealt in exotic substances. The mercury would be mixed with various other ingredients, white lead, powdered pearls, ground gems, to create preparations that were as costly as they were effective. The application required great skill, as too much mercury could cause immediate poisoning, while too little would produce no effect. Women who used mercury cosmetics often developed a characteristic appearance, a kind of luminous, almost translucent quality to their skin that was considered the height of beauty. But the price was terrible. Mercury poisoning caused tremors, memory loss, and eventually death. Yet still women continued to use these dangerous preparations, for the social benefits of perfect beauty outweighed the physical costs. The rituals surrounding these beauty practices were often as important as the practices themselves. Women would gather in private chambers, sharing recipes and techniques, supporting each other through the painful processes of achieving beauty. These gatherings were spaces of female knowledge and power, where secrets were shared and traditions passed down from generation to generation. The timing of beauty rituals was also crucial. Certain preparations were believed to be most effective when applied during specific phases of the moon or at particular times of day. Women would plan their beauty routines around these cosmic cycles, believing that the alignment of celestial bodies could enhance the effectiveness of their efforts. In the end, these medieval beauty rituals reveal something profound about the human desire for beauty and the lengths to which people will go to achieve it. They speak to the universal nature of vanity and self-improvement, but also to the particular pressures and constraints of medieval life, where appearance could determine destiny and beauty could be both blessing and curse. The women who engaged in these practices were not merely vain or foolish. They were navigating a complex social world where appearance mattered in ways that could determine their entire future. Their beauty rituals were survival strategies, ways of gaining power and influence in a world that offered them few other options. And so they endured the pain, accepted the risks, and pursued beauty with a dedication that seems almost impossible to our modern understanding. In doing so, they created a rich tradition of knowledge and practice that speaks to the enduring human desire to be beautiful, to be admired, to be loved, even when that beauty came at a terrible cost. Verse 4. A noblewoman poisoned by rivals, from the world of beauty rituals and their hidden dangers. We turn now to our final tale 1, where beauty itself becomes the weapon rather than the goal. Here, in the shadowed corridors of a French chateau, we find Lady Isabelle de Montclair, a woman whose extraordinary beauty made her the target of a conspiracy so subtle, so carefully orchestrated, that it would take months for anyone to understand what was truly happening. The year is 1389, and the Chateau of Montclair sits like a jewel in the rolling hills of Burgundy. It is autumn, and the vineyards that surround the estate are heavy with grapes ready for harvest. The air carries the scent of wood smoke and fermenting wine, the comfortable aromas of a world settling into the rhythm of another successful season. But within the stone walls of the chateau, a different kind of harvest is being planned, one that will reap death rather than wine. Lady Isabelle is 26 years old, a widow of 3 years, whose husband's death in a hunting accident left her one of the wealthiest women in France. Her beauty has always been her blessing and her burden. But now, in her widowhood, it has become something more dangerous, a threat to the carefully balanced world of inheritance and alliance that governs the lives of the nobility. She is, without question, the most beautiful woman anyone at court has ever seen. Her beauty is not merely physical perfection, though she possesses that in abundance. Her hair falls in waves of deep auburn, catching the light like burnished copper. Her skin has the luminous quality of fine porcelain, unmarked by the smallpox scars that disfigure so many of her contemporaries. Her eyes are the deep green of forest pools, expressive and intelligent, holding depths that seem to invite confidences and secrets. But it is not just her physical beauty that makes Isabelle dangerous to her rivals. She possesses something rarer and more threatening, a natural grace and intelligence that makes her a formidable political player in her own right. Unlike many widows who retreat from court life after their husbands' deaths, Isabelle has chosen to remain active, managing her estates personally, making her own decisions about alliances and marriages, wielding her beauty and wealth as tools of influence and power. This independence has made her enemies, though she does not yet realize how deadly those enemies have become. Chief among them is Lady Marguerite de Bourbon, the wife of the Duke of Burgundy's younger brother. Marguerite is a woman of middle years, once considered quite attractive, but now showing the effects of multiple pregnancies and the stress of court life. Her husband's prospects depend entirely on his brother's favor, and that favor has begun to waver as the Duke finds himself increasingly drawn to Isabelle's company. The Duke's interest in Isabelle is not merely romantic, though her beauty certainly plays a role. He sees in her a potential ally, a woman whose wealth and independence could strengthen his position in the complex web of French politics. He has begun to court her carefully, respectfully, offering her the kind of partnership that few men would offer a woman, a chance to be an equal rather than a subordinate. But Marguerite sees only the threat. She watches her husband's growing irrelevance as the Duke spends more time consulting with Isabel on matters of state. She sees her own children's inheritance threatened by the possibility of new heirs should the Duke marry Isabel. She sees her own fading beauty mocked by Isabel's enduring loveliness. And she begins to plan. The plan that Marguerite devises is subtle, patient, and utterly ruthless. She understands that a direct attack on Isabel would be impossible. The woman is too well connected, too well protected, too careful. Instead, Marguerite chooses a method that will appear to be nothing more than the natural consequence of Isabel's own beauty rituals. Marguerite has access to Isabel's private chambers through her position at court. She has studied Isabel's routines, her habits, her preferences. She knows that Isabel, like most women of her station, relies on a variety of cosmetics and beauty preparations to maintain her appearance. And she knows that many of these preparations already contain substances that are mildly toxic: lead, mercury, arsenic in tiny amounts that are considered safe, but that accumulate in the body over time. The beauty of Marguerite's plan lies in its invisibility. She does not need to introduce new poisons into Isabel's routine. She merely needs to increase the concentration of substances that are already there. A little more lead in the face powder, a bit more mercury in the skin whitening cream, slightly higher levels of arsenic in the lip color. The changes are so gradual, so subtle, that they will appear to be nothing more than the natural variation in the preparation of cosmetics. Marguerite begins her campaign in the late summer, when the court is distracted by the harvest festivities and the preparation for winter. She has enlisted the help of a servant in Isabel's household, a woman named Marie, who has been passed over for promotion despite years of faithful service. Marie's resentment at this slight makes her willing to listen to Marguerite's whispered suggestions, to accept the small payments that come with small favors. The favors seem innocent enough at first. Marie is simply asked to ensure that Isabel's cosmetics are prepared with particular care, to use specific suppliers that Marguerite recommends, to follow recipes that Marguerite provides. The cosmetics that result from these preparations are indeed superior. They provide better coverage, more lasting effects, a more perfect finish than what Isabel has been accustomed to using. Isabel notices the improvement immediately and compliments Marie on her newfound skill. The praise makes Marie more willing to continue following Marguerite's instructions, to use the enhanced recipes that produce such remarkable results. Neither woman realizes that those superior effects come at a terrible price. The poison works slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, Isabel simply feels a bit more tired than usual, a slight decrease in her normally abundant energy. She attributes this to the stress of managing her estates, the emotional toll of her widowhood, the natural effects of aging. She increases her use of the cosmetics that make her look so radiant, not realizing that they are the source of her growing weakness. As autumn progresses, the symptoms become more pronounced. Isabel begins to suffer from headaches, stomach pains, and a strange metallic taste in her mouth. Her hair, once her crowning glory, begins to thin and lose its luster. Her skin, despite the cosmetics designed to enhance it, takes on a grayish pallor that no amount of powder can entirely conceal. The court physicians are baffled by her condition. They prescribe bloodletting, herbal remedies, special diets, and prayer, but nothing seems to help. If anything, Isabel's condition continues to deteriorate. The irony is terrible. As she grows sicker, she relies more heavily on her cosmetics to maintain her appearance, not realizing that they are the source of her illness. Marguerite watches this decline with satisfaction, though she is careful to express nothing but concern and sympathy in public. She visits Isabel regularly, bringing gifts of food and wine, offering comfort and support. She even brings her own cosmetics, preparations that she claims are made, by the finest craftsmen in Paris, insisting that Isabelle use them to maintain her strength and beauty during her illness. These gifts are, of course, the most heavily poisoned of all. Marguerite understands that time is running out, that the gradual poisoning must be completed before anyone begins to suspect what is really happening. She increases the doses, adds new toxins to the mixture, pushes the process forward with an urgency that threatens to expose her involvement. By winter, Isabelle's condition has become desperate. She can barely leave her chambers, can hardly eat without experiencing violent stomach pains. Her beauty, once so radiant that it seemed to light up whatever room she entered, has faded to a ghostly shadow of its former self. Her hair falls out in clumps. Her skin becomes mottled and gray. Her eyes lose their brilliant green color and take on a dull, lifeless quality. The Duke, who has been courting her with increasing seriousness, is devastated by her decline. He brings the finest physicians from Paris, offers to send her to Italy for treatment, provides anything she might need for her recovery. But his attention only makes Marguerite more determined to complete her work. She cannot allow Isabelle to recover, cannot risk the possibility that the Duke's interest might survive her illness. The end comes in February, during the coldest part of the winter. Isabelle dies in her sleep, her body finally succumbing to the accumulated poisons that have been destroying her from within. The court physicians attribute her death to a wasting disease, possibly consumption, certainly nothing that could have been prevented. Her beauty, they say, was too ethereal for this world, too perfect to last. The funeral is magnificent, attended by nobles from across France who come to pay their respects to a woman whose beauty had been legendary. The Duke is inconsolable, speaking of her as if she were a saint, a perfect creature who had been too pure for earthly life. Marguerite attends as well, dressed in appropriate mourning clothes, her face a picture of grief and sympathy. But the truth has a way of emerging, even when it has been carefully buried. Marie, the servant who had been Marguerite's unwitting accomplice, begins to suffer from nightmares, from guilt that she cannot entirely suppress. She starts to drink heavily, to talk too much, to hint at secrets that she cannot quite bring herself to reveal directly. The revelation comes months later, when Marie, in a drunken stupor, confesses to a priest what she has done. The priest, bound by the secrecy of confession, but tormented by the knowledge of the crime, finds ways to guide the investigation that follows. The truth emerges slowly, piece by piece, as investigators examine the cosmetics found in Isabelle's chambers, as they trace the sources of the ingredients, as they question the servants who had access to her private rooms. When the full scope of the conspiracy is finally revealed, the court is shocked by its subtlety and cruelty. Marguerite had not simply murdered Isabelle, she had turned Isabelle's own beauty rituals into the instruments of her destruction. She had used the very things that made Isabelle lovely as the means to destroy her, had perverted the ancient arts of cosmetics and beauty into tools of assassination. The punishment, when it comes, is swift and severe. Marguerite is condemned to death, her co-conspirators imprisoned or executed. But the real tragedy is not in their punishment. It is in the loss of Isabelle herself, a woman whose beauty and intelligence had made her a target for jealousy and fear, whose very perfection had made her vulnerable to those who could not bear to see her succeed. The story of Isabelle de Montclair reminds us that beauty in the medieval world was never safe, never simple, never free from danger. It could attract love and admiration, but it could also inspire envy and hatred. It could open doors to power and influence, but it could also make its possessor a target for those who saw it as a threat to their own ambitions. In the end, perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that Isabelle died, but that she died never knowing why. She went to her grave believing that her illness was a natural misfortune, a cruel twist of fate that had robbed her of her health and beauty. She never knew that her death had been carefully planned, meticulously executed, and disguised as the very thing she had used to enhance her appearance. The cosmetics that had made her beautiful became the instruments of her destruction, The rituals that had been her daily pleasure became the means of her death. It is a fitting, if terrible, end to our exploration of the dangerous beauty of the medieval world. A reminder that in an age when appearance could determine destiny, beauty was never just a blessing, but always a risk. Conclusion. As we reach the end of our quiet journey through the shadowed world of medieval beauty, we find ourselves perhaps understanding something new about the nature of loveliness itself. We have walked with Marguerite through the cobbled streets of Bruges, watching her apply soot to her golden cheeks each morning, hiding her gifts beneath the mask of ordinary plainness. We have witnessed the tragic fate of Joan of Kent, whose extraordinary beauty entangled her in scandals that would echo through the ages. We have explored the mysterious rituals that women performed in pursuit of perfect complexions, often at the cost of their health and sometimes their lives. And we have seen how beauty itself could become a weapon in the hands of those who envied it, as poor Isabelle de Montclair learned too late. These stories, separated by centuries and miles, united by the common thread of beauty's double edge, remind us that human nature remains remarkably consistent across time. The desire to be beautiful, to be admired, to be loved, these are not modern inventions, but ancient human needs that have driven people to extraordinary lengths throughout history. But perhaps more importantly, these tales remind us that beauty, in any age, is never just about appearance. It is about power, about possibility, about the complex ways that societies choose to value and control their members. In the medieval world, where a woman's worth was so often measured by her marriageability, where political alliances were sealed with wedding vows, where inheritance and influence flowed through carefully chosen unions, beauty was indeed a form of currency, but like any currency, it could be stolen, devalued, or destroyed. The women in our stories navigated this dangerous landscape with varying degrees of success. Some, like Marguerite, found ways to protect themselves through careful concealment and daily vigilance. Others, like Joan of Kent, discovered that even the most careful navigation could not entirely protect them from the storms that beauty could unleash. Still others, like Isabelle, learned too late that beauty could make them targets for those who saw their gifts as threats to be eliminated. As you settle deeper into sleep, perhaps you might reflect on how different our modern world is from the medieval one we have explored tonight. Beauty today, while still carrying its own complexities and dangers, is generally not a matter of life and death in the literal sense. We have laws to protect us from the kinds of conspiracies that destroyed Isabelle, social structures that give us more choices than Joan had, medical knowledge that protects us from the toxic beauty rituals that medieval women endured. Yet the fundamental truth remains unchanged. Beauty is complicated, beauty is powerful, and beauty is never quite as simple as it appears on the surface. The medieval world, with all its dangers and difficulties, simply made these truths more visible, more immediate, more impossible to ignore. So as you drift toward sleep, let these stories settle gently in your mind like snow falling on ancient stones. Let them remind you that every age has its own definitions of beauty, its own dangers and delights, its own ways of celebrating and controlling the extraordinary gift of human loveliness. And perhaps in the morning, you will wake with a new appreciation for the simple freedom to be beautiful without fear, to walk through the world with your face uncovered, your gifts unhidden, your beauty a blessing rather than a burden. Sleep well and dream of simpler beauties of morning light on old stone, of flowers blooming in forgotten gardens, of faces long gone, but still somehow beautiful in the gentle preservation of memory and story. The past keeps its secrets, but sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, it whispers them to those who listen with patient ears and sleepy hearts. Good night.